Chapter 1. The emergency room. It started with a phone call that turned my stomach to stone. My wife had been in a car accident. Nothing fatal, thank God, but enough to get her rushed to the emergency room with fractured ribs and a mild concussion. I dropped everything at the office, even walked out of a client pitch meeting mid-sentence, and sped to the hospital like my life depended on it. And maybe, in some ways, it did. When I arrived, she was still unconscious. I sat by her side, held her hand, whispered that I was there. And that's when I heard him, my boss, Richard, standing just outside the curtain, speaking in a voice he clearly thought was low enough. "She deserves better," he said to someone. Couldn't see who. "He'll never be enough for her. Not with how soft he is. Not with what he earns." I froze. My breath caught in my chest. It was my wife he was talking to. She didn't respond, or maybe she did and I just didn't hear it. But I felt the blood drain from my face. Soft? Not enough. In front of my wife, while she was still bruised and half-conscious. Richard had always been the kind of man who thrived on control. At work, he ruled with condescension masked as mentorship. He loved reminding people who held the power in the room. But this was personal, and cruel, and humiliating in a way that scorched something inside me. I stayed quiet. Let him walk away. I didn't confront him there. Not yet. Because that moment, that single sentence, rewrote the way I saw him, the way I saw myself, and it started something I couldn't stop. That night, when my wife woke up, I didn't tell her I heard it. Not immediately. She had been through enough. But inside me, the wheels had already begun turning. This wasn't just about pride. It was about regaining the respect that man had tried to strip from me. And it would start where it hurt him the most, his precious portfolio of clients. Chapter 2. The seed of a strategy. I returned to work 3 days later. Richard welcomed me with a forced smile and a pat on the back like nothing had happened. "Tough week, huh?" he said, leaning in close. "Hope the missus pulls through." He had no idea I'd heard every word. Or maybe he did. Maybe part of him wanted me to hear. That's how men like him operate. They weaponize doubt, plant seeds of inferiority in moments of weakness, and then smile like it was nothing but concern that I didn't answer. Just nodded and went to my desk. The truth was, my wife was recovering quickly. But I was the one unraveling, not from pain, but from clarity. For years, I had stayed under Richard's wing, believing that loyalty and hard work would be rewarded. That one day he'd step aside and I'd rise to his level, maybe even beyond it. But now I saw what he really thought of me. He didn't see me as a future partner. He saw me as a subordinate with just enough skill to make him look good, and not enough spine to challenge him. That was his mistake. Because in that moment, I realized something he never expected. I had more power than I thought. You see, I wasn't just his soft junior partner. I was the relationship guy, the one who remembered clients' birthdays, who checked in on their kids, who sat with them when their accounts took a hit and explained every move like it was personal. They didn't trust the firm. They trusted me. And Richard had grown lazy. He relied on my reputation, my attention to detail, my quiet hustle, but never gave me credit for it. I was his shadow. But shadows only exist when something blocks the light. So I began collecting light. Not literally, of course. But I started making notes, quietly documenting every client interaction I had personally salvaged, every email thread where I had to step in because he dropped the ball, every compliment a client sent my way. I built a portfolio, not of numbers but of proof. And then I started to listen. Not just to Richard but to the team, the interns he belittled, the assistants he yelled at, the junior staff he passed over again and again. There was a pattern. There was resentment. And most importantly, there was silence. The same kind of silence I had sat in at the hospital. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It just means you're waiting for the right time. Chapter 3. Quiet moves. The first thing I did was update my LinkedIn privately. No flashy posts, no sudden announcements, just subtle changes. Expanded responsibilities, clearer leadership language, cleaner positioning. I knew Richard monitored that space like a hawk, so I adjusted visibility settings. He wouldn't see it. But others would. I started having coffee with old contacts, former colleagues, ex-clients who'd moved on, friends who now held senior roles at other firms. Nothing suspicious, just catching up. But every conversation had a purpose: to gauge what the market thought of me, and to plant seeds. One person in particular, Amanda, a director at a boutique investment firm, asked me something I hadn't heard in years. "Why are you still working under that guy?" I didn't answer directly, but I didn't have to, because the truth was already forming. I wasn't planning a dramatic exit. I was planning an extraction, mine and theirs, the clients. The ones who still sent their questions to my inbox instead of Richard's. The ones who followed my advice even when he contradicted it. I had relationships. He had hierarchy. So I started preparing files. Not confidential documents. I'm not stupid, but relationship summaries. Client goals, family details, pain points. Notes that lived in my head now lived on paper. I even began scheduling more one-on-one calls, checking in on clients not just as an advisor, but as a friend. And I listened. One client, a longtime couple with generational wealth, said something that stuck with me. "We stay because of you. If you ever left, well, let's just say we'd have to reevaluate things." I didn't respond, but I made a mental note. They'd follow? Meanwhile, Richard began to notice the shift. He'd walk past my desk more often. He started joining my client calls uninvited. Once, he pulled me aside and said, "Just remember who brought you into this business." I smiled and remembered what he said at the hospital. "He'll never be enough." That sentence had echoed in my mind for weeks. But now, it no longer stung. It motivated. Chapter 4, the resignation had happened on a Tuesday. Not because there was anything special about that day, but because it was the day Richard had scheduled a quarterly client review he expected me to lead, while he took credit. Again, I came in early, earlier than usual, wearing a suit I hadn't worn since my wedding. I looked sharp, calm, focused. Richard didn't notice. He was too busy making last-minute notes on a pitch I had written the week before. "You'll kick off the call," he said, sipping his espresso. "I'll jump in for the close." I nodded. "Sure. But before that, there's something I need to say." He didn't look up at first. "Can it wait?" "No," I said, and placed an envelope on the desk. He finally looked at me, confused at first, then dismissive. "What is this?" "My resignation." Silence. I could see the gears turning in his head. Anger flickered behind his eyes, but he kept it professional. "This is sudden." "Not really," I said. "You just didn't see it coming." "Why?" he asked. "You're walking away from a lot here." I smiled. "No. I'm walking toward something." He leaned back in his chair. "You'll regret this. You don't know how this industry works. You think clients will follow you out the door." I leaned in. "I know they will." His face twitched. "I've spent the last year fixing your mistakes," I continued. "They don't trust the firm. They trust me. And they've already told me as much." He scoffed. "You're bluffing." I handed him my phone, open to an email from one of our biggest accounts. One line stood out. "Let us know when you move. We'll be right behind you." Richard turned pale. I stood up. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's clarity. You showed me who you really are in a hospital room, no less. And now, I'm simply returning the favor." I walked out without a fight. No shouting. No final insult. Just silence, the kind that echoes after something breaks. Outside, I called Amanda. "I'm ready," I said, and just like that, a new chapter began. Not under someone else's name. Not Chapter 5. The clients chose meth. Following weeks moved fast. And yet, every detail is still burned into my memory. Amanda's team moved quickly. They onboarded me with precision, gave me autonomy, respect, space to lead. But none of that compared to what happened next. One by one, the calls came in. Clients I'd worked with for years, some since I was still an intern, reached out directly. "Where did you go? Why didn't you tell us sooner? What do we need to sign?" They weren't just curious, they were ready. And just like that, one after another, they followed me. Not because I asked, not because I promised them anything, but because they trusted me. And because Richard had never understood something simple: loyalty isn't owned. It's earned. By the end of the first month, I had brought over more than half of the firm's most valuable accounts. Amanda was thrilled. I had my own team, my own office, a real title partner. But more than that, I had my voice back. I remember standing in that new office one night, weeks after it all happened, staring out the window at the city lights. My wife called. She had just gotten home from her physical therapy session. "You sound different," she said. "I am," I told her. "He tried to humiliate me. He tried to cut me down in front of you." "I know," she said quietly. I paused. "Why didn't you say anything that night?" "I wanted you to hear it for yourself," she said, "because I knew you'd never forget it. And I knew you'd do something with it." She was right. I didn't lash out. I didn't scream. I moved, quietly, intentionally, with precision. That's the thing about being underestimated. People like Richard confuse silence with weakness. But silence is a tool, and I used mine well. Now, every time I sign a new client, every time I walk into a meeting where I sit at the head of the table, I remember that hospital room. I remember his voice.